Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and I am hopefully back for good. Actually, this time we'll see, because times are still really stressful for me. I didn't end up, because of that reason, uploading my November TBR, and yeah, it's just... life is a mess right now. However, I decided that since it's been a while since I did any type of wrap-up video, that today I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna tell you what I read in the last 2 months. So kind of a recent read, September/October wrap-up type deal. I will not do like a stats type thing at the beginning of the video that I usually do in my wrap-ups. I will just go through all the books that I read in the last 2 months, which is a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 books. So we'll be here for a while, so let's get into it, and let's start with rereads, of which I had 2. The first reread I had, let me grab it, was Labyrinth Heart by M.A. Carrick. I started this reread in August. I originally wanted to be done with it by the time that I did the interview with Marie Brennan and Alice Helms, and so yeah, I did not manage that. I finished it in September. You can see I tabbed it up quite a bit once again. And obviously I love this because I read it for the first time in July. I started my reread in August. This series is great. It's now my favorite series of all time currently. I love it. So what is this about? Labyrinth Heart is the 3rd book in the Rook and Rose trilogy. It was also finished with this book, and in a trilogy we follow Ren, who tries to con her way into a noble family because she grew up on the streets and she does not want to have to worry about money anymore. However, she doesn't notice that the family that she's trying to con her way into is actually close to destitute, and so while that whole story plays out, there's also stuff with a masked vigilante going on. There's children going missing, turning back up, but not being able to sleep. There's a lot of stuff happening in this series, and overall I adore it. I love it. Also, there's like a very lovable crime boss type character. So yeah, can highly recommend this trilogy. Then a book I finished in October, then the reread that I finished in October, even though I started it in August, was Inart by Cornelia Funke. This is the 1st book in the Inart series, and I do by now own the 4th book as well. It's already up there with my other Inart books, which is called Die Farbe der Rache, or The Color of Revenge. I don't know if there's already a translation into English scheduled, but you know, the literal translation of the title would be The Color of Revenge. This was the series that got me into reading, that made me fall in love with reading, and so I very much loved my reread of this. I once again teared up at a lot of points. I was once again in awe of Cornelia Funke's writing, because I just think that she writes YA middle grade type stories like no others. And I love her stories. For those of you who do not know, this series follows Maggie and her father Mo. Mo is a book doctor, so he repairs antique books, and Maggie loves him. And because of having Mo as a father, she very much, you know, has been instilled with a love of books as a whole. The story, however, starts when one day a stranger just appears at night in the rain outside of Mo's and Maggie's flat, and Mo seems to be having some secrets, which is very strange because Maggie never knew her dad to have any secrets or keep any secrets from her. And so the story starts from there, and yeah, I love the series. What can I say? So now we're at the books that I read for the first time, and as always, let's start with the one that I like the least to the one that I like the most. The first I have is Sister, Maiden, Monster by Lucy A. Snyder. This was the buddy read for my book club for October. My book club is of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, and it's all about reading adult fantasy written by women and genderqueer folks. And this is, I think it's not technically like main genre fantasy. It falls more in the kind of horror type thing, but there's definitely paranormal elements to it. In this series we follow 3 different women as they live through the apocalypse, and all of them have very different things to do with the apocalypse. Like, one of the characters becomes sick with this weird sickness that started the apocalypse. Another character starts to hear the word of like God or something, and the third one learns that she might have been chosen for something. Why did I not like it? Simply because it was boring. I found it incredibly boring. And it wasn't even that it was like, it's an all vibes type book and there's impeccable vibes. It was all vibes, it was boring, but the vibes were also just, I don't know, there was something about the vibes that was just off. And a lot of people that I read reviews by said that for them it was just too gory and like kind of too shock value slasher type thing, which for me wasn't necessarily the case. I actually, precisely because of those descriptions, started reading it, because there was like things like cannibalism described in it, and you know, people eating people and stuff. And when it comes to horror, or when it comes to using cannibalism in fiction, I just find that a very interesting thing, or something very interesting that you can do a lot with. But there was nothing done with it. And then the writing was just bland as fuck and so bad, in my opinion, that it just didn't fit the vibes at all. Like, there was a disconnect between the vibes and the writing, and I really didn't like it, and I can't recommend it. That's all that's left to say. I think I gave it 2 stars. So next I have an arc that I read in October, which is A Season of Monstrous Conceptions by Lina Rada. This is a novella, and it's set in the, I think, 17th century, and it follows a midwife. And during that time, there's a lot of monstrous babies being born. And it's kind of trying to find out what's happening, why are those babies being born, what to do, etc. And I gave it 3 stars because I did quite like the concept of it. However, I don't think it was served well enough by it being a novella. Like, it did the thing that I personally don't like with novellas, where there was, you know, it was not enough just vibes and, you know, just writing a concept and playing with a concept, and too much plot. But at the same time, if you focus that much on the plot, it should have been longer to fully, you know, explore everything. So I think it's very interesting still. I still would generally recommend it probably, but for me personally, as a novella, it just didn't work. So if you're also someone who, like me, struggles with novellas, then I probably wouldn't pick this one up. And then the other 3-star that I had was Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction, which is an anthology of speculative short stories written by both African authors as well as authors from the African diaspora. So Black US American authors, Black British authors, Caribbean authors, etc. And I overall, like, I gave it 3 stars because that's generally where I'm at with a lot of short story collections, because usually there are some short stories that I really enjoy, there's some short stories that I just don't really care about that much. I did do this one in audiobook. I really liked that there were different narrators, like there were a bunch of different narrators that did the audiobook. The narrators also, at least as far as I could tell from the accents, also had multiple different backgrounds, so I did really enjoy that. And yeah, so I think if you enjoy short stories and if you enjoy speculative short stories, I definitely think this one is worth checking out. So I had to go change the battery real quick. But continuing on, we're at the 3.5-star books that I had. And the first 3.5-star read that I finished in September was Starlight Jewel by E.L. Lyons, which is the first book in the Gifts of the Old Tree, and this one is a self-published book that was sent to me by the author in return for a review. I haven't gotten around to filming the review yet. That will still come. But yeah, so this one is very interesting world building wise, because basically you have Spriggans and you have humans, and then you have something called hybrids, which are usually people born from a Spriggan mother and a human father. And we follow our main character, whose name was, I forgot her name because I'm terrible with names, but yeah, Exley. We follow our main character Exley, who is running from this big hybrid society, because basically all the hybrids live in this one city, in this one society, and the hybrids either like work as assassins or as thieves. And Exley used to be something called the Starlight Jewel, so among the female hybrids she was the top one. However, she ran away a few years ago for her own reasons, but now the hybrids have caught her scent, and so she is dragged back into their society while still having to maintain secrets and having to work for her own ends. I will still film a full review of this. Overall, what I would say is that I enjoyed this. However, in terms of love to detail, it didn't quite reach what what is my uppermost standard, I would say. There were some issues I had with actions of characters, or characters telling other characters things where I was like, I don't think those characters would do that right now. But overall, aside from these things, I really enjoyed Exley as a character. I liked the story. So my mom just called and I forgot where I was. Yeah, I flew through the last half of this book, and I think especially if you're like, this is very much new adult, if you do like new adult, if you do like romantic fantasy but are maybe looking for something that doesn't have the romance quite as central as in a lot of romantic fantasy, I do think that this might be up your alley. So yeah, that's it for that one. Then I need to find the title again. It's called, I think, The Witches at the End of the World. It's another arc that I had from NetGalley. And so The Witches at the End of the World by Chelsea Iverson. This one is quite a short novel. It's about 300 pages, and it is set in Norway, I believe, kind of in medieval-y times, maybe like 15th century or something, so like end of the Middle Ages. And we follow two sisters, both of whom are witches, and when they were little, their mother was burned at the stake as a witch, and their grandmother whisked them away into the woods, and they have since then lived in secrecy in the woods. But now their grandmother just died, and while one of the two is still full of rage and full of anger at the humans that, you know, took her mother from her, the other one wants nothing more than to have a community again. And so the sister who wants the community decides to go back to the village under a false identity where her mother died, and try to live her life there and build a life there. And so things are starting to roll, you know, danger comes again. The mistrust in the village is still there, and when, you know, things are looking worse and worse that winter, mistrust grows once again. And it's kind of about those two sisters and their very different paths, but also those paths constantly intertwining and coming back together, coming back towards each other, etc. I really enjoyed it. The one thing that I would say that I once again didn't really like, or really didn't like, was that it was two first-person perspectives once again. Both of the sisters had a first-person perspective. I just like can't. Please, author, stop doing that. I hate it. Anyway, but yeah, I think if you're looking for a quick read centering two sisters, this one I would definitely put on your radar. The next 3.5-star read I have is Daughter of Red Winter by Ed McDonald, which is the first book in the Red Winter Chronicles. I did just finish the second book as arc as well, but I'm gonna talk about that in my November wrap up. This one is adult high fantasy following Rain, who is currently in this kind of convent. And when she brings a young woman into this convent, she doesn't notice that there's gotta be some very steep consequences. And so she learns a lot more about the world, and she comes to a place called Red Winter where kind of warrior, magician type people live and study. And she might start being one as well, or she wants to start being one as well. So this one is, I found very interesting because Rain has kind of death type magic, so she can see ghosts, which is something that, you know, always piques my interest. Rain is also bisexual, so this one is queer. It's kind of hard for me to talk about what I enjoyed about this or what I didn't enjoy about it, because do I think this is an incredibly special, you know, change things within the fantasy genre type book? No, not really. However, I really enjoyed myself with this one, and I enjoyed myself even more with the second one, but we'll get to that again. Main gripe, once again, this is written in first-person perspective. I'm not a fan of first-person perspective. But overall, I really like Rain as a character and her voice as well. I thought that Ed McDonald was really well at writing her relationships to the people around her. I found it also very interesting how he wrote men, because he's not necessarily very nice to men in this book. And a lot of them are like grade A creeps. And they are treated as such also, so it's not the type of deal where a man writes a creep but doesn't realize that it's a creep. And so yeah, it's very interesting. There are some instances where the lingo is a bit modern for the type of setting that took me out a little bit, but overall, really enjoying this series so far. Next we have 2 4-stars. First I have He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan, which is the second and last book in the Radiant Emperor duology. The first one was She Who Became the Sun, which you can see right here behind me. And I reread She Who Became the Sun in August, and I obviously raved about it. I was kind of, you know, disappointed when I first read it because it didn't meet my expectations, so I gave it 3 stars. I reread it, it was absolutely perfect. I gave it 4 stars, and now I have given the second book on first read 4 stars. I have a kind of similar thing with this one as well as with She Who Became the Sun, which, you know, I even had on a reread, in that I am somewhat emotionally detached from the story when I read those books. So these books aren't the type of books where I very much emotionally get into it, which I think once again led to me having just slightly of a disappointing reading experience. Although when I started it and I realized my emotional detachment, I already knew that was a chance. So, you know, I kind of prepared for that and wasn't that disappointed in the end, because towards the end there was this scene or this chapter where everyone, absolutely everyone, was talking about how much they were crying and sobbing and just emotionally absolutely destroyed by the book and by the story. I didn't have that personally, but again, that's just with my personal reading experience with the book, or with these types of books with this type of story, which I've just realized that in general with a lot more recently, and with talking to other people, that I just, with certain types of writing or certain types of stories, for some reason, I just don't become that emotionally attached, and my enjoyment is very much, you know, intellectually of the books. Anyway, so that was it, but that wasn't necessarily the reason why I gave the book 4 stars, because again, same type of deal with the original or the first book as well. I think the reason why I gave the book 4 stars was because personally I'm not the biggest fan of how some of the character arcs were wrapped up. There was actually a moment within the story where I was almost sure I would give this 3 stars because I was so unhappy with how one of the character arcs wrapped up. However, in the end, that one, you know, got better again, so I did end up giving it 4 stars. I ended up giving it 4 stars because the way that I see this story is that the way it was chosen to be finished is very valid, and I really understand where it's coming from, why the story was chosen to end this way. However, I personally wasn't a fan. But that being said, I sound so negative right now. I still need to film a review of this. I sound so negative. I still gave this 4 stars. I still love the duology. I love the series. I still love the characters. So I still highly enjoyed myself. There were just some things where I was like, I'm not necessarily a fan. So yeah, but I will try and get a review of this up. So then I will try to go more into it. Second 4-star book I had was Kushiels Justice by Jacqueline Carey. This is the second book in Imriel's trilogy, which is the second trilogy within the Kushiels Legacy universe. And I just realized I didn't tell you what She Who Became the Sun is about, but I'm sure y'all know what it's about. It's about a girl who takes on the fate of her brother, or well, forcibly takes on the fate of her brother, and she wants nothing more than to be great. So that's the basic gist of She Who Became the Sun, the Radiant Emperor. But anyway, this is the second book in Imriel's trilogy, and I know there's people who don't love the Imriel trilogy as much as Phaedra's trilogy. I personally also, like, there's aspects that I really don't enjoy as much in this one. The romance I don't really care about, to be honest. However, I adore Imriel, okay? So I still really love this series, and the reason why I love this series even more is of what Jacqueline Carey does with the fantasy genre, but that would go into way too much detail right now, so I will finish reading her books and then I will make a full video on why Imriel's trilogy in comparison to Phaedra's trilogy, or like in conjunction with Phaedra's trilogy, is actually genius. Anyway, the first series kind of follows Phaedra, who is a courtesan spy, and so because of her role as a courtesan spy, she gets drawn into the politics of her country. And Imriel's trilogy then follows Imriel, who is the son of a traitor, and it kind of follows him trying to do right by his country, but also trying to do right by himself and being good. And it's very heartbreaking, and Imriel is a very, very traumatized character, which I personally love, so, you know, that's where we're at. And then lastly, I had 2 whole 5 stars in September and October. The first was Mammoths at the Gate by Nivo. This is the 4th book in the Singing Hills novella series. These are novellas that I actually really, really enjoy, and of course Nivo is one of my all-time favorite writers. I love her writing. The series follows Chi, who is a monk and a chronicler, and what they do is they travel the world talking to different people and gathering their stories, and those stories, as Chi gathers them, are what the novellas are. And that's basically all that I can say, because it's novellas, so there's not that much to sum up, but it's just, I found this one very, very touching and very important, because it was a lot about identity and also accepting and respecting someone's identity after they have died. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really loved it. And then the last 5-star I have was A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This is the Naked Illumicrate edition book, which is absolutely gorgeous, to be honest, and has some gorgeous sprayed edges. This one is... it's marketed as dark academia. Ava Reid calls it dark academia. There's dark academia elements in it, however, I would call it a gothic novel. It's also published as YA. I personally don't really see where it is necessarily that much more YA than Ava Reid's other books, but officially this one is YA. And in it we follow Effie, and Effie is a student to this university within this country. Usually there's not that many women allowed at university, however she made it at the highest grades at the entrance exam. She originally wanted to study literature, however the literature course is closed to women, and so she has to study architecture. And as she studies architecture, there's a competition sent out to rebuild the house of the recently deceased national hero author, who also happens to be Effie's all-time favorite author, who wrote a novel that is incredibly important to her. And so Effie writes into this competition, or takes part in this competition, and she wins, and soon after is sent to the estate to look at this very, very ruinous old house. And yeah, once there, stuff starts to happen, as so often is the case. I just love Ava Reid's writing. I love Ava Reid's storytelling, and once again, this one I just don't want to talk about too much because I do want to film a full review of it, which will be up soon. I'll try to finish all of the reviews this year at least. And so yeah, I can highly, highly recommend it. And with all of that said, that was it for the books that I read in October and September and October. If you have any thoughts you want to share on any of the books that I talked about, leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!